How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the video. You were all very vocal that you want me to do the Iyslander deck that I covered on Patreon about 2 weeks ago here on the channel. We had an overwhelming amount of votes for this deck, so let's dive into it straight away then, shall we? So for Iyslander, well, Iyslander wasn't doing that well previously in the meta, but now that Prism has reached Living Legend, I do think that this deck is gonna have a lot more footing than it used to. I think it's definitely going to be one of those top decks in the right hands of a good player that knows how to navigate this deck perfectly. And I have a feeling that a lot of Prism players that were previously Prism mains will probably move on to playing this deck instead, because it has a little bit of a similar feeling to it. Instead of Spectral Shields, you of course have the Frostbites, and you don't really have that many auras, I guess, but still, Channel Lake Frigid is an aura, I suppose. So what this deck wants to do is to tax the opponent as much as possible. The way it does this is by playing stuff from the arsenal during the opponent's turn. Usually those are ice cards like Arctic Incarceration, which will create a Frostbite under target hero's control, or something like a Cold Snap that will freeze the arsenal, on top of then also generating a Frostbite because you play an ice card, a blue ice card during your opponent's turn, which is very nice. But Iyslander has a very nice setup of cards available to her in the form of Aether Icevein. I think these cards right there are probably the best cards in the deck. Simply because they, for one, they deal damage and they force the opponent to discard, and with the blue one that's particularly annoying because the opponent will have to block all the damage or else they are threatened to at least pay 2. So you're almost guaranteed that if you play a blue Aether Icevein during your opponent's turn, they're probably going to pitch a blue to prevent that damage, which means that they have at least one less card in hand. And in most decks, if they pitch a blue, that means they probably don't have much in the hand left to have a proper turn to begin with. So with this deck, you kind of want to have a keeping 3 cards in hand kind of setup. Like during your opponent's turn, you usually want to pitch 1 card, play the thing in your arsenal, and then if you have enough resources left, you want to activate your Waning Moon to deal some additional damage. And if you don't, you kind of want to block with something from your hand, maybe 1 or 2 cards, so that during your turn you can put an ice card or a blue card back into your arsenal for the next turn. So with Iyslander, we have so many nice taxing effects, like Channel Lake Frigid just makes it almost impossible for go white decks to go off and pretty much do anything. It can also throw off the Guardian game plan because they work with the Seismic Surge tokens and they need a certain amount of resource available to them to not get screwed over by something like a Channel Lake Frigid. But something like this you can very easily play during your turn, so they cannot jank you out by just playing it up front before you have priority to get this on the field. So against Guardians, definitely play this out during your turn and put something else in your arsenal. We have some very nice taxing effects in the form of Freezing Point. This one deals 5 damage to target hero. A Freezing Point was fused, which is very easy to do with this deck. It instead it deals X arcane damage, where X is 5 plus the number of Frostbite, Ice, Afflictions, and Frozen cards they control. This works especially well in combination with stuff like Ice Eternal. Usually that does mean that you need to invest like 3 pitch cards to make this work properly, because you do want your Ice Eternal to be able to generate a significant amount of Frostbite, and you still need to have a ice card in hand in order to be able to fuse the Freezing Point as well, on top of being able to pay for the boots and stuff like that. But there's a lot of very cool play patterns, and for the most part you have this main deck. And with Iyslander, because you are playing around with your blue cards so much and you don't have that many red cards in the deck in general, like most of the strategy is tied to the blue cards in this deck, and that leaves a absolutely massive sideboard potential. In this case, I believe I have 12 sideboard slots available in this deck, where you can mix and match from your sideboard to adjust your playstyle for the opponents that you are facing. So Insidious Chill right over here is probably one of my favorite cards in the deck as well, simply because if you get one of these on the field early, they stay on the board with 3 frost counters on it, and then every single time when you eye fuse, you can remove a frost counter from Insidious Chill and then force the opponent to either discard or pay 2, which once you have this thing on the board, it becomes incredibly difficult for pretty much any deck to navigate properly. Even things like Guardian, because again, like let's say they still have a pommel in hand, you play something, you fuse it, you force them to discard that pommel or to pitch it, and you don't have to worry about them suddenly playing it and then you having to discard. Of course, if it's in the arsenal, then there's not much you can do about it. But having this thing on the board forces the opponent to play differently, to kind of play all their cards at once before you have your priority window, which means that usually they have to play some very suboptimal turns. For example, if you're up against let's say you're up against a Katsu Ninja, like they cannot go in with a Kodachi first, simply because they will have to fear that you end up fusing something and them having to discard something. So instead they need to play the biggest attack up front, pitching, and then becomes much easier for you to manage the turn, because you can simply block that, load them up with Frostbite and stuff like that, and force a discard or 2, and just stopping the turn right there. Usually that means the opponent can only deal upwards to maybe like 7 or 8 damage, which again you can easily block out with maybe 2 cards from your hand. And then you move over to your turn, you put something in the arsenal again, and the game starts from the very beginning yet again. In terms of the main deck, we have the Hypothermias in here. Of course, Hypothermia is not really good against a bunch of decks out there. However, it is an ice card, it still costs 0, so I think Hypothermia is just a good card to have in general, simply because in the worst case scenario that you have an opponent against you like a Guardian that doesn't really use Go Again to begin with, you can very easily just play this from your arsenal to your opponent's side of the field, generating a Frostbite token on their side, which will make stuff like reactions a little bit harder for them. So I do hope we get maybe another ice card that costs 0 in the upcoming set that has a useful effect. But for now, since it has a very good effect against most of the meta, I just keep it in the main deck, just to keep our ice count high enough to be able to fuse stuff and to generate Frostbite tokens on the opponent's side of the field. In terms of equipment, well, it's pretty much the standard Iyslander lineup. We have the Waning Moon, the Coronet P. Coronet is really good. I really underestimated that card at first, but paying 3 and forcing the opponent to either discard or pay 1 is extremely powerful, and something that I really underestimated, because then during your turn you already strip 1 card from the hand, or like a Tunic Trigger or something like that, and then once their turn rolls around, then the moment you have priority, you can tax them some more with stuff from the arsenal. So Coronet Peak is definitely a must-have. I really underestimated this card. I think I talked with the patrons about this, that I personally preferred the Skullcap before. Well, I completely changed my mind. This is the truth when it comes to Iyslander to me now, so make sure to run it. We have Fiendel Spring Tunic. For the glove slot, like, you could run the Metacarpus Node, but since you're playing a very slow game plan with Iyslander anyways, having the additional block available is probably gonna do more for you than a Metacarpus Node would in general. So, but you can be free to experiment as you like. You can switch this one out with a Metacarpus Node if you want, for that little bit of additional damage, but usually that just adds up to 1 additional damage, since we're not really slinging spells around like a Kano would, for example. So I think the Metacarpus is not really worth in this deck. Stormstriders though, definitely worth it if you can get one of your Aethers, what's it called, the one that deals 5 damage and forces a discard or pay 2. If you can play that during your opponent's turn by activating this, pitching, playing that thing, you are probably just going to straight up stop the entire turn on the spot there in a pinch, and that will put you a complete turn cycle ahead of the opponent. Then for the sideboard, we have a absolutely massive sideboard. Of course, we have the Alluvion for the mirror matchup. With the Alluvion and the boots, we have 3 Arcane Barrier available to us. Depending how many Icelanders and Canis are going to be in the future, we might want to change the sideboard a bit. Of course, Prism has reached Living Legend now, which means that stuff like Command and Conquer and the Raised Face could be trimmed down a bit in favor of other stuff, but I feel that these 6 cards have a lot of very good effects against a bunch of the other heroes out there. mainly Lexi, the Rune Blades, stuff like that. And of course we might be seeing an increase in Dromai players. Dromai is a good deck, and I definitely think a lot of players are going to be navigating that, so having some additional 6 attacks in the sideboard is useful in general to have some sort of a game plan against Dromai, because again Dromai is one of those heroes that Iyslander struggles against, because they have so many ways of generating Arcane Barrier with their little dragons and stuff like that. But yeah, I will put a full description of the sideboarding and stuff in the description. I will also put a link to my FaBrary.net deck list down in the description as well. Usually I only post those on Patreon, but this time around I will make this one available in the description, so you can go hop on over, check out the deck, and maybe play it a bit on fabonline.com, so that we get a bit more data to see how this deck is performing in general. Overall, I'm satisfied with the deck. Of course, like I said, in terms of the sideboard, I might need to change up some things, like the Command and Conquers as well as the Scours are probably not the most optimal picks right now, but for now, I'm happy with it. I hope that this deck was useful to you. I hope this is what you were hoping for, and I guess I will see you all very soon with another data analysis video, and I guess more deck techs in the future. Let me know which deck you want me to cover next, because up until now I've been covering pretty much every meta deck on my Patreon, patreon.com/Kugane Gaming. So if there's a certain deck you want me to cover on the channel, if there is enough interest for it, I will definitely make a video. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all very soon with the next video. Take care.